Can I ask Dr. Neeraj to moderate the next session, please? Thanks everyone for
Yeah.
the wonderful.
Good afternoon. Am I audible?
Lovely, sir. Very clearly audible.
Okay. So very, interesting talk and mix of different pathies also. But I'm sure the next talk will be more traditional talk with Dr. Deepak Bansal here. At the onset, I'll thank IAP Chandigarh for giving me this opportunity to moderate this very interesting and important topic of anemia in children. Anemia, as we all know, is one of the commonest issue which we see in our practice, day-to-day practice, and it is thought that almost 60% of children less than 5 years of age have anemia of some extent, and most common is nutritional anemia. And it is a major cause of not only short-term but long-term consequences also, including neurodevelopmental effects. And as a primary physician, it is our responsibility that we not only treat these children, but we should try to prevent this anemia, and early detection is also very important. Dr. Deepak Bansal, as we all know, doesn't need much of an introduction, but he is, you'll be displaying the slide, or should I take it? Gaurav? Dr. Deepak Bansal?
I think he's already put it on the screen, Dr. Deepak has already shared.
That is his
he's
talk,
already shared.
Yeah. Okay, his introduction basically. So, Dr. Deepak Bansal is professor of pediatric hematology and oncology at PGI Chandigarh, and he's a prolific researcher and writer with almost 250 articles in reputed journals and contributed almost 35 chapters in 35 books. He has been widely awarded also. He has been past secretary of hematology chapter of IAP and is the section editor of Indian Journal of Pediatrics. So I'm sure it will be a very educative talk today. I hand over the mic to Dr. Deepak Bansal to start his talk, please. Welcome, Dr. Deepak.
Right. Thank you, Dr. Neeraj, for that kind introduction. Am I audible?
Yeah, loud and clear. Yes.
Right. Thank you.
Yes, Deepak. Thank you.
So, as Dr. Neeraj has said, that this is going to be more of a traditional talk and not as interesting as the earlier one was. But you can just relax. I know it's kind of a bit of a stressful time because of COVID, but this is going to be a very light talk, which is going to be absolutely applicable for day-to-day practice. So, my first question would be, at what age should iron supplements be started in a full-term, normal birth weight, exclusively breastfed well baby? So the question is, when a child comes to you in the clinic and he's absolutely well, just give me a minute. Yeah, so exclusively breastfed well baby. So continuing with this, so the American Academy of Pediatrics says it's at 4 months of age, and the dose is 1 milligram per kg per day. And until when? Until absolute iron containing complementary foods are introduced in the diet. So every child whom you see who's well, is breastfed, is normal weight, has to be started on iron at 4 months of age at 1 milligram per kg per day, till they start having good weaning food, which unfortunately in India during first year of life may not often be appropriate as far as iron content is concerned. So what is the definition of anemia in children? So this may look like a bit of a boring slide, but I'll just try to sort of summarize it. Like, for example, if you see this is 6 months to 5 years. We often deal with this age, and 12 HB of 12 is normal, and anemia by WHO is defined as less than 11. Then when we talk about 5 to 12 years of age, the anemia is less than 11.5. So if you can remember these two numbers, less than 11 till 5 years of age, and less than 11.5 from 5 to 12 years of age. Subsequently, it's hard to believe that, let's say from 14 to 19, the normal hemoglobin in boys is 15. Sometimes it is difficult to remember that the hemoglobin can actually be so high on a normal, and the anemia is defined as less than 13 in boys more than 14 years of age. So there are some formulas given as to how to remember, but it can be hard to remember even the formula. So roughly, if you can remember that hemoglobin less than 11 below 5 years of age, and hemoglobin less than 11.5 below 12 years of age is defined as anemia. So we often tend to not think about iron deficiency without anemia. But if you think about it, iron deficiency is iron deficiency anemia, and iron deficiency just by itself without anemia. So what is the significance of knowing this? So iron deficiency anemia, as the name would say it, is fall in hemoglobin, which I've already explained, as well as a fall in serum ferritin. So ferritin less than 15 is iron deficiency. And when it occurs with fall in hemoglobin, it becomes iron deficiency anemia. Whereas iron deficiency alone is a biochemical iron deficiency with normal hemoglobin, but the ferritin is low, so less than 15. So we can have children and adults who will have normal hemoglobin, but their ferritins will be low, and that's a biochemical iron deficiency. So the question is, why should we know this? This is because iron deficiency by itself has been shown to affect cognitive impairment. So this was an MD thesis done in our unit, and we had taken absolutely well 3 to 5 months old children who were breastfed, exclusively breastfed, and normal weight, not preterm. And at 4 months of age, we found iron deficiency, that is biochemical deficiency, at 21%. And at 5 months of age, it was 36%. So normal children coming to OPD at 5 months of age, the incidence of biochemical iron deficiency is about 1/3 of the population. So this is what I was saying, that low intelligent quotient scores have been observed in iron deficient children even before the development of anemia. So the next question is, we've talked about term well baby normal weight children. At what age should iron supplements be started in preterm babies? Now this is more commonly known because we deal with infants who are unwell. However, it is more difficult to answer when to give iron and how much iron to give when the kid is normal. So in preterm babies, typically the answer is 2 weeks of age when full feeds have started. And this is the dose which is recommended, 2 to 4. And why there is a range? How does one decide whether to give 2 or 4? So I would say that if the baby has been given or is being given formula milk, then one can use a lower dose because the formula would have iron. Whereas if top milk is being given, which ideally a pure cow's milk should not be given during infancy, then one would have to give a higher dose because pure cow's milk would not contain iron or contain less iron. But the dose maximum is recommended is 15 milligrams. So how is the prevalence of anemia in our country? We know it's high, but just looking at some objective numbers. So we are talking of children 6 months to 5 years of age. And if you remember the definition, that is hemoglobin WHO definition is less than 11. So this is National Family Health Survey in the year 2015-16. So about 5-6 years ago. So the overall prevalence of anemia in the country is nearly 60%. So it's a whooping number, something that we can't be very proud of. And all of us need to do something about this massive number. So it's interesting to know that the National Family Health Survey 5th has also been done, and the results are slowly coming up. Not all the sites are visible, states results are visible. So this has been done just last year. And for example, if you look at Chandigarh, the number is even more than the national average. The national average is 59, Chandigarh is 73%, which means that if you see 10 kids in your OPD practice, we are talking of age 6 months to 5 years, 7 of them will have anemia. And if you look at, I have picked up the North Indian states here. So these are the numbers that you can see. All are pretty high. The lowest is Himachal, which is about half. And the recent data suggests that the anemia prevalence is actually worsening. Like in JNK, it was 54%. It has gone up to 73%. Similarly, in Himachal too, the prevalence has not really reduced. So talking about other states in India, if you're interested, so in most of the states, the prevalence of anemia, here we are talking of children 6 months to 5 years, has actually worsened in the last 5 years. So in 2015-16, for example, in Andhra Pradesh, the number was 59%. It has gone up to 63%. So this assessment is done by a capillary method, that is by a finger pinch method. And this is not by venous blood. And I'll come to that. So this is a more reliable, or rather more reliable way of assessing anemia, called the Comprehensive National Nutrition Survey, which was done in 2016-18. And it was published in Lancet Adolescent. And so they picked up children both in the age group of 1 to 9 years as well as 10 to 19 years, large number of children. And they use this much more reliable sign method of hemoglobin measurement, whereas the the National Health Survey uses the HemoQ photometer, which is not considered to be very reliable. And this is capillary method, whereas here they used venous blood. And not just hemoglobin, they also looked at the etiology by doing the ferritin and folate B12 CRP to rule out infections, because ferritin could be elevated with infections. So, this is the slide which is extremely reliable and very eye-opening. So I'm reading the title here. So it says figure 6.7, prevalence of iron deficiency among children 1 to 4 years. So we are talking of age 1 to 4 years. So, and this is specifically iron deficiency. This is not anemia. This is iron deficiency anemia. And if you look at the national average India, it is 32%. So basically it means that if children in the age group of 1 to 4 years, 1/3 of them definitely have iron deficiency in the country. But we living in the North India have nothing to be proud of. Look at Punjab and Haryana. It's at the top with numbers of nearly 70% for Punjab and about 60% for Haryana. This is specifically iron deficiency anemia in the age group of 1 to 4 years. So why have we landed ourselves in such a soup? And people have done some statistical methods of assessing the estimated yearly cost of iron deficiency anemia in children. So looking at, again, the same age group, 6 months to 5 years, I don't know how they do this, but they have shown in models that the intangible cost, which means cost which cannot be easily estimated, is this number, disability adjusted life years, and the production losses are these many million US, which is equal to nearly is 1.3% of gross domestic product. So iron deficiency anemia really contributes to nation's ill health. So why is what is the prevalence of anemia in children in the developed countries as compared to India? So if you look at the numbers, so USA is 6%, UK is 13%, and India is 16%. So why is there such a huge gap in this prevalence of iron deficiency anemia in our children in the US, UK, and the Western countries? So the answer is, so the answer for this is our diet. We love to give milk to our children. We are a milk drinking nation, particularly North India. We love our rotis or we love our rice. So our diet is basically milk, wheat, or rice based. So what are the iron containing foods? So we tend to remember them during our MBBS days, but unfortunately in our day-to-day eating practice, we often tend to forget. So I'm actually going to go through it because this is ideally what we are supposed to eat and give to our children. So palak, sarson ka saag, methi, dalein, pulses. Then, other like chole, chana, soybean, tofu. It's available commercially quite easily actually. Peanuts and gur. Now, how much of these foods can a child in the age group of 6 months to 5 years actually eat? So the foods which contain more iron are eggs, fish, and meat. And overall, many of us are vegetarian, and social taboos would not allow us to eat non-vegetarian foods. And even those who are non-vegetarian would hardly eat the amount required in everyday practice. And unfortunately, milk, curd, tea, and wheat and pulses are foods which not only contain less iron, or they may contain iron, but they reduce the absorption of iron. So that is another unfortunate part. So this is another question which we sometimes tend to forget in our daily life. In the age group of 1 to 5 years, parents will often ask, "Ki doodh kitna pilaye?" Or you may ask the patient, "Ki bacha doodh kitna peeta hai?" But one may not be very sure that how much milk should be given or what is more and what is less. So the answer is 500 ml. And these are the two publications which say it. In the Western literature, they even say it up to about it's about 580 ml. So a child in the age group of 1 to 5 years should not be drinking more than 500 ml of milk, which would actually be 2 cups of milk or milk products per day. I'm repeating this. A child in the age group of 1 to 5 years should not be taking more than 2 cups of milk in a day. And it has also been seen that children more than above 1 year of age, if they are still bottle fed, then discontinuation of bottle will help to reduce milk intake and increase the intake of other foods. I have nothing against bottle feeding, but children who are bottle fed tend to drink more milk. Why? Because it's easy to just latch on to the bottle and just keep on gulping it. So which is the best? So the only, with this type of diet in our country, the only way to treat iron deficiency prophylactically as well as curing it is to give iron as a medicine or as fortification. So what is the best iron preparation for treating iron deficiency anemia in children? It continues to be ferrous sulfate. Problem is it's available free from the government supply, and anything which is free is not considered to be good. So, but whatever said and done, it is cheapest and it continues to be the best. So iron preparations, ferrous sulfate, unfortunately in syrup form is not that easily available. It is available, but not very commonly. And I understand that there is some issue with its shelf life, but there are acceptable alternatives to ferrous sulfate, which is ferrous fumarate, gluconate, and ascorbate. And these are easily available in the market. Colloidal iron and iron polymaltose complex have lower efficacy, and there is really no need for anyone to be using fancy iron preparation when ferrous sulfate, fumarate, gluconate, or ascorbate are available. So it has been shown in one publication, this is by Dr. Jagdish Chandra from Lady Hardinge, that in the market today in India, 100 milligram elemental iron can be purchased from as low as rupees 1.3 to as high as up to 200 rupees. So large number of preparations are available, and absolutely it's not true that the expensive one is better, because the cheapest one is actually proven to be more efficacious. So what is the dose? I know during my MD, the Nelson, I think, had mentioned 6 milligram per kg per day, but now the dose more or less consensus is to give 3 milligram per kg per day. And we are talking here of treatment. So I'm talking about the treatment dose of iron deficiency anemia. And frequency, again, in the beginning, I know during my MD days, it used to be about 2 or 3 times per day, but now the consensus is that it's good enough once daily. Preferably fasting, preferably in between meals, because meals will reduce the iron absorption. And it has been shown that efficacy of once daily is equal to 3 times per day. So once daily, preferably fasting. And the duration, we all know this, that one has to give it for longer than when the anemia is resolved. So 2 additional months, that's to take care of the stores, and the total duration should be minimum 3 months. So this is a common thing that we see when receiving iron. A child develops URI or loose stools. So should one withhold the iron or continue giving them? So the answer is, do not stop iron for intercurrent minor ailments. This is important because as I will come in the next few slides, as in the National Iron Plus initiative, one has to keep on giving iron prophylactically for the entire childhood. So, and the child will keep on having some kind of URIs or diarrhea during this time. So if one associates the iron with the diarrhea or with a minor URI, one would stop it, the mother will stop it, and she will not restart. So there is no irrefutable data on harm, but none on benefit either. I don't think anybody would like to give iron while a child is admitted with an infection, but once they are discharged or they are having some minor ailments at home, one should continue iron. Otherwise, the mother will get wrong impression that iron is worsening the infections. So what should I inform the parents regarding the GI adverse effects of iron in children? So during our MBBS, we've always been taught that iron causes constipation and it is a horrible drug during pregnancy. At least in our clinic, we don't really see any GI adverse effects of iron. And thankfully, this has been shown in trials. The recommendation is to avoid highlighting GI adverse effects. And placebo-controlled trials have demonstrated that iron at 3 milligram per kg rarely causes GI symptoms. So if you use 3 mg per kg, iron in children should not be causing GI side effects. The fancy preparations of iron polymaltose may be causing less GI effects simply because they are less efficacious. We are giving less drug. So if you think that your iron is causing some GI effects, maybe try giving it with meals or just reduce the dose. So this is the $1 million question that we all should be able to answer. When you see a normal child or a child with minor complaints in your clinic practice, should iron be prescribed? Let us see a mother just brings in a child to ask, at 5 years of age for DPT vaccine or something. Should you be giving iron? So, and he doesn't have anemia. He does not have anemia. So the answer comes from the national program called the Intensified National Iron Plus Initiative. Previously, it was called Iron Plus Initiative, but I think when the governments change, they like to change the names. It's also called, it's a part of Anemia Mukt Bharat and under the aegis of Poshan Abhiyan. So what is this about? So the answer to that earlier question is that every child should be on iron all the time. If you can just remember this from this talk today, my purpose will be served. Every child should be on iron all the time. So the National Iron Plus Initiative, if you can remember this slide, so from 6 months to 5 years, iron is given twice a week on fixed days. So this is the dose. It's supposed to be a syrup provided free by the government dispensaries. So 1 ml iron IFA contains, so the dose is 20 milligram of iron and it contains folic acid as well. So twice a week from 6 months to 5 years. This is prophylactic dose. And I totally believe in this. Why? Because once you have a prevalence of 60% anemia and much more in the North India, we all have to do something about it. And what about 5 to 19 years? In the age group of 5 to 19 years, it is given once a week. So once a week, tablets from 5 to 10 years, this is the dose. And from 10 to 19 years, this is the dose. So once a week in all children 5 to 19 years. And if you look at the girls, in girls, once they are beyond 19 years, they will continue the iron till menopause as per the National Iron Plus Initiative. So a girl who is born in India, which should be on iron from 6 months of age till she attains menopause. Anyone who thinks that this is too much of iron should always remember that the prevalence of iron deficiency anemia is huge in our country. I think we have just got used to listening, like looking at a hemoglobin of 10, 11 in adults and saying, ye to theek hai. Right. And for children, albendazole is to be given twice a year. So from 1 to 2 years, the dose is 200 milligram and above 2 years, it's 400. So what is the implementation of this program? Such a great program. So the government of India has now also devised wherein they look at their own performance. You can click this website here and it will tell you actually how the program is doing. So I'll just try to show what I'm trying to show here. This is the first quarter of 2020. And this says percentage of children in the age group of 6 months to 5 years, which were provided the adequate iron folic acid syrup. So the India average is 9%, which means if 100 children had to get iron, only 9 got it. And look at Chandigarh, not even 1. Punjab, 2%. So this is the, the implementation. Thankfully, Haryana has a decent number of 41%. So basically, what does this mean? It means that the government program on iron control is just not working. And it's not a surprise. I mean, iron deficiency anemia has been a massive problem forever, and it is not going away. Rather, it is only increasing. The reason is very simple. Our diet is not going to change overnight. And the only way is to pump iron into our children. How to do that? Whether you want to do fortification or whether you want to give daily iron, I mean, whether you want to give twice a week iron is totally, is not important. What is more important is that we need to do at least one thing and stick with it. So if the government of India is not able to implement the program well, I think at least on a one-to-one basis in our own clinics on a day-to-day basis, we should try to follow the guidelines of this program in all the children who come to our clinic. You know, I would say rather than giving multivitamins or cough syrups for children with URI, if one can give iron, the previous speaker spoke so much about vitamin D. So, I mean, no harm in taking care of vitamin D as well. But for iron, there is definite evidence-based medicine. So what about iron compliance? How do you ensure that mother will keep on giving iron from 6 months till 18 years of age? So the way to tell her is, which is true, is that iron is equal to IQ, particularly in the growing first few months and first few years of life. The mouth should be rinsed with pani so that the teeth are not stained. And I believe that taking iron regularly is more important than any dose or preparation. I mean, the dose is available, I mean, the drug is available free of cost. My understanding is that many of it just expires or does not reach the clinics because of various reasons. So when to transfuse blood in nutritional anemia, there is really no cutoff. Some people say it's 5 because there can be a risk of sudden death below 5, but one should try to avoid it. One indication which is mentioned in books is hemodynamic compromise, which is hard to understand what it means because all children with anemia will have tachycardia. They will also have a liver which is, pushed down a bit. So, once you start iron, things really start improving really fast, and see if you can avoid giving transfusions to children with iron deficiency anemia. So just a quick case here. So this is a 4-year-old child. He's often been pale. 4-year-old often been pain, and he has received iron syrups for several months, but the hemoglobin has never really gone beyond 9, and he does not have hepatosplenomegaly. So what are we dealing with here? And okay, these are the numbers. So we can see the hemoglobin is low. It's less than 11, and he's got a normal WBC TLC. So I'm looking at the MCV here. I'll come to this in more detail, but the mean corpuscular volume is 66, which is low. The platelet count is a bit high, and the serum ferritin is low as well. So we are continuing to have iron deficiency anemia despite giving iron. Why iron deficiency? Because the MCV is low, the platelet count is high, then ferritin is low. So what are we dealing with here? So most of us would know this. This is celiac disease, and increasingly we are. I mean, most of us are so tuned to diagnosing celiac disease now that this is no longer a surprise. And this is a very good study which looked at nearly 25,000 healthy adults, and estimated the celiac autoantibodies. And in Haryana, the number is 1.2%. It means out of 100 patients who walk into your clinic, at least one will have celiac disease. And when you go towards the northeast, the number reduced to 0.9 because they tend to eat more rice, and much less lower in 0.1. But even 0.1 is not low. It means that out of every 1,000 children, one will have celiac. So pretty common disease. As soon as you start giving iron in children with anemia and the hemoglobin doesn't go up, please think of celiac and ask for a PPG. So this was a publication from the unit in 2011. So earlier we used to get a lot of children into our clinic with anemia, and they used to turn out to have celiac disease. This has more or less stopped now because the diagnosis in the periphery has become so strong that we hardly get children with anemia coming to the clinic directly. They would always now directly go to the pediatric gastroenterology. So no diarrhea in about 43%, normal height in 50%. And some of them even had spleen because possibly from megaloblastic anemia, and long symptom duration interval of 3.5 years. So coming with a longish history. So we need to diagnose celiac disease much earlier so that they can start growing. So is there any role of parenteral iron in day-to-day practice? I mean, this seems a bit of a mystery because the gynecologists or the obstetricians would tend to use them, and we wonder at times whether we should be using them. There is a very limited role in children. Response is not more rapid. These are the specific indications where one can use inflammatory bowel disease, bowel resection, rare disorders like epidermolysis bullosa because you're just continuously losing the skin and losing iron with it. Even heart failure is mentioned as an indication because it causes congestion of the intestine and the mucosa is shed off and the iron is not absorbed. A rare condition is called as IRIDA. There is one indication which is mentioned as poor tolerability to oral iron, which I think is hardly ever seen in clinical practice, and this indication is more often abused rather than used. Here I will quickly like to talk about delayed umbilical cord clamping. I'm not a neonatologist, but being a hematologist, this is very near to my heart. And this has now become a national practice rather than international practice. I had no idea about this during my MD training. So what is this? The baby is to be kept 10 to 15 inches below the introitus in vaginal delivery or below the incision in a cesarean section. Advantage, the placental blood flows into the newborn. About 30 ml per kg goes, improves the iron status, reduces anemia, reduces intraventricular hemorrhage, reduces NEC. Disadvantage, increase in jaundice, increase in requirement of phototherapy, but no increase in exchange transfusion. And recommendation, delay the cord clamping for at least 30 to 60 seconds and up to 2 to 5 minutes has also been mentioned in the literature. This has got the endorsement of Anemia Mukt Bharat, and the National Iron Plus initiative supports the use of delayed umbilical cord clamping. So it has been shown to improve the neurodevelopmental outcome as well, although the evidence is not that robust, both in term and preterm. The only place where you would not do this is non-vigorous infants requiring resuscitation. So obviously, if the baby is unwell, needs resuscitation, one would just want to clamp the cord and take the baby for resuscitation. But otherwise, this is a great thing to reduce iron deficiency anemia in the growing age and maybe improve his IQ scores. So next, so we've spoken about iron. So what about the prevalence of B12 and folate deficiency in India? So thankfully, the iron preparation all contain folic acid. So this is again the comprehensive National Nutrition Survey, which is a highly reliable survey. So this is the age group from 1 to 19 years. And folate, as you can see, is about from anything from 1/4 to 1/3 of all the children. So folic acid is present in all green leafy vegetables. It is also present in most of the iron folic acid tablets or syrups. So this should be easy. Whereas B12, and these are the numbers that you can see with B12. B12 is a little difficult one because the diet may not be that good, particularly if one is a vegetarian. So here I'll quickly talk about MCV. all of us have got excellent access to. Just request to mute your mic, please. Request to mute your mic.
Dr. Arun, can you please mute everybody?
Right, so I'll continue. So how to look at the MCV? We have all got access to the report, so I'll be talking about the MCV here. So, you know, sometimes it can be really hard to know what a normal MCV should be in the various ages. So just I'll try to make you remember this. So at 1 year, it starts at the lower limit is 71. And at 14 years, the upper limit is about 94. So it can be really hard to remember these normal ranges. You know, we should try to convince all our lab hematologists to give us age appropriate normative data. We've got so used to looking at adult normal ranges that we don't even question it. So I think everybody has it, all patients have a date of birth. So the computer software should be able to generate age appropriate normative data so that it is much easier for us to be sitting in the clinic and looking at a normative data. So I would say that for an average child, any MCV below, let us say about 75 and a MCV more than 95 should ring bells. So that would be a microcytic and macrocytic anemia as per the MCV. So two common causes of anemia with low MCV. So when you see an MCV which is below 75, what should you think of? So iron deficiency anemia, number one, and thalassemia, either a trait or a major. There are one or two other causes, but these are the overwhelmingly most important causes. Believe me, you can easily look at a Coulter report and look at the hemoglobin, the MCV, and the RDW and make a diagnosis of all these three conditions easily while sitting in the OPD. So iron deficiency anemia, how do you diagnose? We know that the HB will be low. Please look at the MCV to see whether it's low or not. So less than 75, look at the MCV. Then RDW, or the red cell distribution width. This is a marker of anisopoikilocytosis as to how much are the shapes and sizes of the red cells varying. So the normal is 12 to 14, and it is always high in iron deficiency anemia. So low MCV, increase RDW, and in about 50% of the cases, the platelet count will be high as well. You have these four things, and you're sure that it is iron deficiency anemia. So you really do not need iron studies in your day-to-day practice. We hardly ever get them done. All these complicated ones, iron TIBC, generally not needed. With 70% prevalence of anemia, who wants to do iron studies in the beginning? Just give them a therapeutic trial of iron. And if it doesn't work, then later on one could do it. So what about apparent failure of iron? So you think that it is iron deficiency anemia, you give iron, it doesn't work. So what could be the reason? I think in everyday practice, the most important reason is continuing excessive milk intake and poor compliance. So one has not been able to convince the mother well. So please do that again. The third common cause, I think, would be celiac disease. And after that, think of alternative diagnosis like thalassemia minor, or a very rare diagnosis. It's a genetic cause called iron refractory iron deficiency anemia. Or there could be some sites of hidden blood loss, like in the gut or in the the lungs. And one can always ask for stool occult blood if microcytic hypochromic anemia is persisting with low ferritin despite giving oral iron for adequate time. So I'll just do quickly a case here. So sorry, this is a 3-year-old child. Again, he's largely asymptomatic. He came with a URI episode. For some reason, my CBC was asked for. So the hemoglobin is low. It's 10.6. So it's less than 11. So it's less than 11. So there is anemia. So white cell count and WBC, the DLC seems normal here. The platelet count is normal as well. So the MCV is less than 75. So it's low. RDW normal, always remember, is 14 to 16. 14 to 16. So RDW is normal. The RBC count. So what about the RBC count here? So the RBC count normal is, I think 5 to 6 lakhs or something, or 4 to 5 lakhs. So it's elevated. So one has anemia. So the HB is low, but surprisingly, the RBC count is up. So what is a condition in which the HB is low, but the RBC count is high? So HB low, but RBC count is high. So this is typical of THAL trait. So please look at RBC count in your Coulter reports. I mean, most of us would hardly ever have the habit of looking at the RBC count in a Coulter report. So if the HB is low and the RBC count is high, invariably it's going to be a THAL trait. It doesn't happen every day that with your low HB your RBC count will be up. So how to know from a Coulter report that it is a THAL trait or an iron deficiency anemia? So I'll repeat this. Look at your RDW. Normal is 12 to 14. RBC count normal is 4 to 5. I wish they would give us normative data along with every report. I mean, but RBC count is still the same in children and adults, so that's okay. With iron deficiency anemia, the RDW is up because there is a lot of anisopoikilocytosis. RBC count is low in iron deficiency because your iron is less, you don't get RBC, so your iron WBC count is low. But in thaltrate, because there is dyserythropoiesis, the body is trying to make red cells which don't work well, the RBC count is up. So low HB with high RBC count, with low MCV, it's thaltrate. But if the RBC count is low, it is iron deficiency anemia. You can still give them iron and just try it for a few months. If the hemoglobin doesn't improve, there is no harm in giving iron to children with thaltrate. It's contraindicated only with thal major or intermediate, not with thaltrates. So how many of us in this meeting have thalassemia minor? So I think we are about 60-70 of us. So how many of us in this meeting will have thalassemia minor? So the answer is the average is 3.3%. And in North India, it's a little bit more. So maybe about 4 out of 100 would have thalassemia minor. So I would think that today in this meeting, about 2 or 3 of us will have thalassemia minor. So now this is really important to know why. So for this, we have already done how to diagnose thal minor. And the confirmatory test is by asking a hemoglobin HPLC. And the HbA2 more than 3.5% tells us that the patient has thalassemia trait. But thing to remember, HbA2 more than 3.5% is thalassemia trait. So we like to show these pictures to our patients when anybody is diagnosed with thalassemia minor, because all of them have thalassemia minor. And just to reinforce that having thalassemia minor is not going to affect livelihood or lifelong in any way. However, one needs to know that when both parents have thalassemia minor, there is 25% risk of birth of thalassemia major in each pregnancy. So this is a major thing. And we continue to get patients with thalassemia in our clinic. Thankfully, not from the Tri-City, mostly not from the Tri-City, because most of the obstetricians or in the Tri-City would be getting thalassemia screening done during pregnancy. So every pregnant woman must have thalassemia screening done in the first trimester. If she's found out to be a thaltrate, just quickly get the husband done. If he's not a thaltrate, great, nothing to be done. But if the husband is a thaltrate as well, then one has to go for antenatal diagnosis, which is done at 10 to 12 weeks. And it's pretty cheap. You can look at the price here. So please do all that is possible to prevent the birth of children with thalassemia. Please communicate with your obstetricians when you go and attend cesareans that they must do thalassemia screening during the first trimester. So beta thalassemia major, quickly a word about this. So we know that this is seen typically above 4 months of age with hepatosplenomegaly and anemia. We are all used to seeing children with thalassemia, and thalassemia, like just to show the smear here as compared to the normal. In normal, the red cells are rounded with central pallor. This is the platelet. Whereas in thalassemia, you can see all these RBCs. They are empty, so it's hypochromic with nucleated red cells. So that's the way smear looks like, and you confirm it asking for a hemoglobin HPLC. I've seen that this is highly reliable investigation, even from all the private labs. We've hardly ever got any wrong report from the private. So what does we need to look at? The HbF, this is the normal at about 1 year of age. So anything more than 1% would be abnormal. So HbA2, if you recall, anything more than 3.5 is thalassemia trait. The HbF is high at the time of birth and drops to 8% at 6 months. So you have to sometimes look at age appropriate normals to make a diagnosis of thalassemia. So what are the common errors in requesting hemoglobin HPLC? If you send a sample below 4 months of age, because it can be quite confusing to read the report because the HbF is normally high as well, or if it is following a blood transfusion, because then you will get a normal one or not so high. So how to sort this out? So you can always repeat the HPLC just before the next transfusion. One has to try to let the hemoglobin drop to as much as possible, which may not be easy, or just get the parents HPLC done. Both of them will have to be thalassemia trait if the patient has thalassemia major, or you can always do DNA test in case of doubt. So thalassemia major, this is the Thalassemia Daycare Center at PGI Chandigarh. We know that all of them need lifelong blood transfusion and iron chelation. So I will just tell you the 3 golden rules for management of thalassemia, which you can really help in your everyday practice. Believe me that all the tertiary care centers are really full, and we all need your support to manage all these cases in day-to-day practice. Number 1, please keep the please keep the pre-transfusion hemoglobin more than 10, which means that if a child comes to you who has a hemoglobin of even 10.5, please transfuse him. I'm talking of thalassemia major. Do not say that let the hemoglobin drop to 8, 9, then I will transfuse. We have to maintain a good pre-transfusion hemoglobin range so that they continue to grow well. Second, blood will give iron, so they will get iron overloaded. So one has to maintain the serum ferritin below 1000 and encourage bone marrow transplant at an early age so they can be cured of their illness. So what role can a pediatrician play in diagnosis prevention of thalassemia? Whenever you see a child with thalassemia, please encourage their relatives unmarried relatives, particularly to get screening done with hemoglobin HPLC to know whether they are THAL traits or not. We continue to get THAL majors in our clinic who are relatives of THAL majors just because they haven't spoken in the family. So what are the common blood transfusion errors that we see in patients with thalassemia major? Number one is the first, that most people tend to give blood only when the HP drops. So we want to maintain a good HP. Second, this is something which is important to know. Now one need not bring the blood back to room temperature before transfusion, except if you're doing an exchange transfusion in neonate or something. So the blood, as soon as it is brought from the blood bank, can be directly hung and the blood transfusion can be started. One need not wait for it to come to room temperature. For children who are above 30 kg, remember the volume is 20 ml per kg. So one has to transfuse 2 units for any child with thalassemia major who's above 30 kgs. It is a common error to keep on giving them 1 unit, so they will stay anemia and they will have growth failure. One need not give blood very slowly. One can give it over 2.5 to 3 hours, because particularly if the pre-transfusion hemoglobin is not very low. Lasix is a highly abused drug while giving transfusion, and most THALs will not need them. Unnecessarily giving Lasix and keeping him awake the whole night for peeing is really unfortunate. So this is the drug that one often uses, Deferazirox, for reducing iron in thalassemia major. It's a simple drug. One can really read about it. That's the dose. All THALs have to be on it lifelong to reduce their iron content. And that cost has really come down now. One has to monitor OTPT and hold the drug if the OTPT is more than 5 times the upper limit. So I'm just changing gears here. I don't have much time left. So talking about children coming with anemia and bleeds to the OPD. So anemia and bleeds. So we know that the differential diagnosis is leukemia. So I mean, these are all petite, or ITP or aplastic anemia. So how do we distinguish between leukemia, ITP, and aplastic anemia while sitting in the ITP? So while sitting in OPD. So is it ITP or acute leukemia? So ask yourself these 3 questions. Does the patient have hepatosplenomegaly or lymphadenopathy? We know this. If it is present, when we say lymphadenopathy, it should really be significant, not those tiny nodes. It should really be seen from far, not just palpable. So bone pains is the real good clue. If anybody has backache, if the child has backache, or if he's limping to the clinic, or if you ask the mother ki wo raat ko sote time uski taange to nahi dabate. So that is what is bone pains. And anemia proportionate to bleeds, because in ITP you will often not have anemia, or the anemia will be as much as the blood has been lost. So the WBC in leukemia again can be low, high, or normal. Remember that the WBC count in leukemia can even be normal. So the real clue will come from the DLC. The peripheral lab, the technicians will often not like to report blasts in the peripheral smear, because that is like giving a label to the child of leukemia. So always look at lymphocytosis. If you have 9,000 TLC with a lymphocytosis of, let's say, 90%, it means that either he has got infectious mononucleosis or he has got some marrow involvement from either aplastic anemia, but then the TLC is high. So always look at lymphocytosis, which will give you a clue to the presence of acute leukemia. So next question, is a bone marrow examination necessary to diagnose acute leukemia? It used to be, and that was our teaching, but now for several last few years, no longer, because if the WBC count is good, let's say above 10,000 or something, with a fairly good blast percentage, they can do flow cytometry and look at the morphology, as well as do cytogenetics in PCR from the peripheral blood itself. So common errors in ITP that we see in everyday practice, and this continues to happen even in our own emergency in PGI, is that patients often get platelet transfusions. There's absolutely no point in giving platelets to children with ITP unless they are having some real life-threatening bleeds like IC bleed or some GI bleed, because they have antibodies and they would all be destroyed. And over-treatment continues to be common with ITP by everybody, even by ourselves. One has to learn to remember not to chase the platelet count and chase only the bleeds. So the indication of treatment in ITP is mucosal bleeding and not just skin bleeds. And giving steroids, the current dose of steroids is 4 milligram per kg per day for 4 days. 4 milligram per kg per day for 4 days for newly diagnosed or acute ITP. There is no such recommendation of giving it for longer duration. So, so just a little bit more about anemia. So we spoke about low MCV. What about raised MCV? So what are the causes of raised MCV? So you look at your Coulton, and if it is more than, let's say, 95, so we know it's megaloblastic anemia. So we know folic acid B12, so one would take care of that. Ask if they are on phenytoin, any condition in which there is reticulocytosis. So reticulocytes are the young red cells. So that is why they will be larger in size. So you will have a raised MCV. And uncommonly, I mean, I have never really seen patients with hypothyroidism come with anemia and we make a diagnosis of hypothyroidism, but this is something which is mentioned in the literature. So what about hemolytic anemia? When to suspect hemolytic anemia? Just quick 2 slides, which you can hopefully remember. So this is a triad, children coming with anemia. unconjugated hyperbil, and splenomegaly. So this is a classical triad of a child with hemolytic anemia: anemia, jaundice, splenomegaly. So just one slide, if you can remember this, how to remember hemolytic anemia investigations. Number one, always talk to your pathologist, pick up the phone and ask them to look at the smear. Always talk to the pathologist and get a reliable reticulocyte count done. And then ask yourself, is the anemia episodic or is it chronic? So episodic is G6PD deficiency or autoimmune hemolytic anemia. Autoimmune hemolytic anemia diagnosis is easy. When you will send for cross-match, they will have problems in cross-match because their DCT is positive. Chronic, so ask yourself these two questions. Is the retic high? When I say high, it means really high, like 10, 15%. Or is it normal or slightly high? So causes of raised retic count with anemia, splenomegaly, and unconjugated hyperbil is hereditary spherocytosis. Autoimmune hemolytic anemia can also be chronic, and these are the less common disorders. And here we have beta thal or alpha thal, or less commonly congenital dyserythropoietic anemia. So if you have a good history of episodic versus chronic, you have a smear, you have a retic count, you can narrow down to where you are headed. And just to tell you some newer investigations, something called as EMA binding. So we are used to doing osmotic fragility in the past, but that is gradually getting replaced by a test called as eosin 5 melamide test, which is based on flow cytometry. And the flow, it binds to something called as transmembrane band 3 protein, reduces fluorescence. It's a simple, rapid, sensitive test for the diagnosis of hereditary spherocytosis. Often labs are continuing to do both OFT as well as EMA binding in their labs. And other thing which has really now come in a big way is the next generation sequencing for the diagnosis of hemolytic anemia. And our lab colleagues, they believe that rather than doing so many investigations for hemolytic anemia, because it's a stepwise process, one can just ask for NGS, and then it can be expensive, but it can be quick. For example, this child has had pyruvate kinase deficiency, and it's a tough diagnosis. The biochemical levels of pyruvate kinase again are expensive and may not be always reliable. So sometimes one has to do NGS to make a diagnosis of these disorders. So last few slides. So just few cases. This is an 8-year-old boy. He's been pale for a year. So long-standing anemia, and he's received 2 transfusions in the preceding 9 months, no bleeds. So anemia and have already received transfusions. He's pale, he does not have organomegaly, and he seems a bit stunted. So I've shown this picture. So there has to be something in the picture which should give you the clue. It's not very obvious, but he seems to have small eyes. You know, one has to see this diagnosis once and then one would remember it forever. So we have here anemia. There is no hepatosplenomegaly. Most of you may have guessed it. Okay, or wait, let us look at the CBC. So there is anemia here, and the WBC count is low, 2,500. And again, look at here, there is lymphocytosis, 90%. So whenever there's lymphocytosis, always think that the marrow is involved, either with leukemia or with aplasia. So it's something has gone into the marrow or it is empty, and the platelet count is low as well. Typically, there are no bleeds unless the platelet count drops below 10 or 20,000. So this is Fanconi's anemia. So they typically have short stature and hyperpigmentation, microcephaly. Like if you look at this child, he does seem to have a small head. His eyes are also relatively small. And if you see here, the thumb is missing. So often they will have abnormalities of the thumb. The diagnosis is made by chromosomal fragility assay. We see, I think, about 4 or 5 cases of Fanconi's anemia every year in our clinic. And the diagnosis can also be made by NGS, and the treatment is with a bone marrow transplant. So last 1 or 2 cases. So this is a 10 months old infant. 10 months old infant, anemia, and he's already got 2 transfusions. So that's kind of weird. In 3 months, he's already got 2 transfusions. He's 10 months old. No hepatosplenomegaly, no jaundice, no hemolytic facies. I mean, you can look at this child. He is now 10 months old. He does not have organomegaly. He does not have jaundice. So it's not hemolytic anemia. So question is, what does he have? And he's looking so well and active. So, you know, if you have, I don't know whether seen the picture here, can you see what this is? So this is a bifid thumb. So I don't know if you've got the clue now. So this is a Diamond-Blackfan anemia or the pure red cell aplasia. Less common, but I guess we would see about 3-4 cases in our clinic every year. So Diamond-Blackfan anemia, the median age at presentation is 2 months, and the diagnosis is made by showing erythroid hypoplasia in the bone marrow. Transfusions till 1 year of age, and after that one can try steroids. It is recommended that one should not give steroids prior to 1 year of age, because that may cause cognitive impairment. And if steroids do not help, one can try bone marrow transplant. So I think this is the last one. This is a 4-year-old girl. So this is pneumonia with anemia. We often do not see children of frank pneumonia who have really low hemoglobins. Now look at the X-ray of this child. So whenever you have such bad X-ray with a hemoglobin of, let's say, 3 or 4, and so whenever she's got this pneumonia 2-3 times, and each time she gets this pneumonia, she needs a blood transfusion. So always remember that when you have so-called pneumonia with anemia, what do you need to remember? And so what is the likely diagnosis? So it's again quite uncommon, but I think all of us should just remember this condition, that pneumonia with anemia. So this is idiopathic pulmonary hemosiderosis. These children will not come with fever, but they will have a bad X-ray because they're bleeding into their lungs. So a X-ray picture which looks like pneumonia with low hemoglobin, and one confirms the diagnosis by doing hemostadin-laden macrophages in the gastric aspirate, and always rule out celiac disease and SLE in such cases. We have had 3-4 children who have had celiac disease underlying idiopathic pulmonary hemosiderosis, and that can really be rewarding because then you would not use to use immunosuppressive drugs or steroids, which is a drug of choice otherwise. So causes of anemia below 6 months of age. So we have typically spoken about little older children till now. What about children below 6 months of age? Why is this age unique? And that is because nutritional anemia are uncommon in this age because you have the mother's stools. So nutritional anemia is uncommon below 6 months in term infants, and in preterm infants till they double their birth weight. So below 6 months, blood loss, which may be occurred from the cord, one would not know it. ABO-RH incompatibility is quite common and can be delayed and keep on, and children will continue to have anemia for up to 2, 3, 4 months of age. Always remember malaria, although we hardly get to see it in Chandigarh. Thalassemia typically is not seen below 4 months of age, but now with increasing awareness, we are getting diagnosis earlier and earlier. CDA is a dyserythropoietic anemia, so that could be a possibility, and we've already discussed pure red cell aplasia or diamond blackfan anemia. So I'll end my presentation here to thank the entire pediatric hematology oncology unit and our DM fellows who contribute so much to our day-to-day learning, and our nurses, our NGOs, Sahayata, Can Kids, Jeevdaya, and Thalassemia Charitable Trust, remembering Professor Marwaha in this forum, and also sort of proudly to tell you that the HEMONC unit has got completely revamped now, and we have got a HEPA filtered pediatric hematology oncology unit now in PGI. Thank you for your patient listening.
Thank you, Dr. Deepak, for a very comprehensive talk on not only anemia as such, but an overview of common conditions which we can see, and updating us on a number of concepts. It is seen because we have very, very few questions in chat, so you have almost answered all the queries which our members have. Any idea why Chandigarh is so high on anemia list and so low on iron supplementation?
It's high for basically one reason, because as Punjabis, we like to give a lot of milk to our children. That is the main reason. Every mother thinks that doodh se taakat aati hai. The weaning is invariably delayed. From own experience, what I've realized is that if you really have to wean a child at 5-6 months of age, one has to keep the child away from the mother in a separate room. Otherwise, breastfeeding is such a activity that the child and the mother both like it. So if one has to really reduce breastfeeding at 6 months of age, it's better to give the child to somebody else for a few days so that a solid feeding can start. Otherwise, invariably, even in good socioeconomic backgrounds, solid food is not getting introduced at 6 months of age. And regarding why iron is not being given in the schools, I think it is just government laxity. And so that is why all of us as pediatricians have to do the role of the government in giving iron in a day-to-day practice to our children.
Because only 0.7% of children on iron, so that means even in private also we are kind of missing it out, isn't it?
Absolutely. I think we've just got used to looking at low HPs because we think that it is, if you tell the mother ki iron de do, and maybe wo engineer nahi banega, doctor ban jayega. So that could help.
Vitamin C and iron, very common question. Yeah.
Right. So vitamin C improves the absorption of iron. But you know what? I think iron preparation, iron dose, and how you give is not important. What is more important is that one has to keep on giving it. Yes. One has to keep on giving it.
Yes.
Slow and steady. Like twice a week till 5 years of age, and then once a week till 18 years of age in males, and till menopause in females.
Okay. There's another kind of recommendation of giving 3 months in a year. I think WHO has said that.
Right. So that used to be 100 days in a year. That's the way it came up, even for pregnant women. But then, so one has to give it either way.
Yes.
So then they felt that once a week is easier rather than giving it for 3 months and then stopping it altogether.
Yes. Dr. Indrajit wants to know that if there is anemia with normal RBC count and normal RDW, so should we investigate for both the conditions, iron deficiency and thalassemia trait?
So if there is anemia with normal RDW and normal RBC count, so there are two ways of looking at this. One can still give iron for a few weeks to few months and see how it works. And then if it doesn't resolve, then one can investigate for iron deficiency as well as THAL trait. So THAL, there is really no harm in doing hemoglobin HPLC for any child. Because ideally it should be done particularly in Punjab, Haryana, Chandigarh, because out of 100, 3 children will have thalassemia trait.
Yes.
So, ideally it should be done in all. It's a question of acceptance and, paying. I mean, HPLC, I think even in private should be about 700, 800 rupees. So it is some money, but it is money which anyway has to be spent someday. Thank you.
Yes.
Dr. Neeraj, I just wanted to add on.
Sure.
Dr. Deepak, is HbA2 level influenced by iron deficiency anemia?
Right. So that's a very good question. And we have always been taught from our textbooks that one should do hemoglobin HPLC after treating iron deficiency anemia, because iron deficiency anemia can falsely reduce the HbA2 and one will miss thalassemia trait. But Dr. Reena Das from hematology at PGI, they have done several studies on this and they have shown that it is actually not true. Because whatever HPLC blood samples that they get often would have iron deficiency with it, but they have not found it to be influencing the HbA2 levels. So the answer is that in clinical practice, it actually does not matter.
Okay, thank you.
And what kind of response we expect once we start with iron, when to say it is not responding to iron?
So if I have to answer like a textbook answer, if the anemia is very severe, then the hemoglobin should increase by 1 gram every 2 weeks. Whereas if it is a mild anemia, then hemoglobin will increase by approximately 1 gram every month. Although in clinical practice, the response is much rapid. The things about doing a retic count and all those things are not really practical. So I think one can give iron and call the patient after 3 to 4 weeks to see how it has worked.
Yeah, and Gaurav wants to know if there's any minimum age of doing a HPLC so we don't have to repeat it later on.
So I would say at least not below 6 months of age.
Yeah.
Preferably as later as we can go, but definitely not below 6 months. But sometimes the children do come with anemia even at 4 or 5 months of age, and one can send it before a transfusion, and one can even send the parents along with it, because if the parents have thalassemia trait and the child has a high HbF, then it has to be beta thalassemia major.
In OPD practice, Deepak, is there any role of screening for low HB, and in that case, capillary HemoQ kind of a device, does that make any sense?
I mean, you're asking for screening for anemia in OPD practice?
Yes, screening for anemia in OPD practice, and then using a capillary method like HemoQ for doing that, because venous sampling in OPD practice for a well baby doesn't really make that much sense.
So let me see, I can probably give a population based answer and a one-to-one based answer for this. When we already know that out of 100, 60 to 70 children in Chandigarh have anemia. So do we really want to do it in all? And anyway, so if they have anemia, then you will give them therapeutic iron for a few weeks to months and then change them to once or twice a week iron. So exactly. If you think that they are pale, you might give them therapeutic iron for a month or two and then change them to prophylactic after that. But if you want to do the hemoglobin in your day-to-day clinic practice, it's fine. According to American Academy of Pediatrics, every child at 9 to 10 months of age should get a CBC done.
A CBC, of course, not an HB.
I will have to really check to see whether it is hemoglobin or CBC. I'm assuming that it might be CBC. But you know what, there is, I actually can't answer that. I mean, you're asking whether you should do hemoglobin every child who walks into your OPD?
Probably yes.
I would say that why not just start them on iron as per the guidelines of National Iron Plus Initiative program anyway?
Because the parents might say that we might be in the 30 or 40% who are not anemic. Because when we look at national data, we are talking about children, a lot of children coming from lower socioeconomic status. It is possible that in a private practice, the incidence of anemia may be 20% or 30% instead of 60%, and then 70% people you're treating unnecessarily with iron. And iron does have a little bit of side effects for many of the kids. That's what the private practicing pediatricians will tell you.
Right. So that's a good question. And studies have been done. All this data is available both for urban as well as rural population. And it has been shown that the prevalence of anemia in urban is either the same or lower by about 5%. So it's actually a misconception. Even I used to have that children coming from good socioeconomic families will not have anemia. And iron given in once a week or twice a week, I think will not have adverse effects. And so you are basically asking, so then argument which I can give for doing HB is that maybe their HB is normal, but they may still have biochemical iron deficiency. So they may have iron deficiency without anemia. So iron does not have role just on hemoglobin production, but also on many biochemical pathways.
So the question would be that should we start everybody on twice a week, once a week, or first treat them for a month just by looking at their clinically? That was the basic question. How do we decide when to treat and how much to give?
If they have anemia, then of course you have to give them for a few months and then change to prophylactic dose.
Yeah, so Gaurav, that we have to understand that it is a prophylactic thing. We want to prevent anemia, and for that, if we start early at 4 months of age, probably parents should also get used to it, that iron is to be given. And as Deepak said rightly, that every child on iron all the time. So that concept has to be probably learned by all of us, that iron needs to be given as a preventive rather than only as a treatment.
And the reason why this is done is simply because the diet that we eat, chapati, chawal, doodh, does not contain iron. We have to accept it. As Indians, we love our food. We are very proud that we are vegetarians, but we have to accept that it does not contain iron. We have to accept that 60 to 70% of our children in the age group of 6 months to 5 years have anemia. And the only way to overcome that is to add iron, whether you want to add it as fortification of salt or atta, or as sprinklers, or take tablets or syrup, is anybody's choice, but it has to be done.
Dr. Deepak, would the duration of therapy would be how much in a child who doesn't have anemia and has iron deficiency versus who has anemia plus iron deficiency? So the duration of treatment would vary, I suppose.
Right. So that's a good question. I haven't thought about this earlier. So iron deficiency anemia, the textbook answer is that we give iron till the hemoglobin normalizes and then for 2 months after. Biochemical iron deficiency, how to treat? I have never thought about that. I guess one would still treat them with some iron for a few months, for 1 or 2 months, and then change them to prophylactic.
You trust Dr. Jyotsna to have these kind of questions?
No, because no, I'm just saying as my practice, all vegetarian children, I give them 2 months of iron every year, irrespective.
I think
this
that's
is
perfect.
For vegetarian, and because I always ask a dietary history, those who are say eating non-veg frequently, they are egg eaters, I may not necessarily give iron, but for vegetarians, irrespective, I give them iron.
I think that makes a lot of sense, because basically what you're saying is that you're giving them iron for 60 days in a month, in a year.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes even vegetarian families, you can, try to coax them into giving eggs to their children. So that may be a religious thing and some may not want to give it, but many parents are actually okay in giving eggs to their children.
Dr. And there was one, sorry, I'll go after you, Mahesh.
Dr. Deepak, bang on your advice on, the dietary advice. We know that in India, with vegetarianism so much in vogue and of course excess of milk consumption, our NFHS figures of 60% children, and each 5 year it is rising, clearly proves that our diets are faulty. And so much so that in private practice, I sometimes ask parents that if they are willing to give eggs, most vegetarian parents agree to that. They say, if it is so important, so crucial for my child, I'm willing to give eggs. We also know that non-vegetarian sources will outscore vegetarian sources for the source of iron. And, traditionally, what we know of as the best sources of iron in the vegetarian diet are actually not. So, for example, palak and all other traditional greens, if we compare their iron efficiency index, it comes out very poor. We'll have to consume very large amounts to get our RDAs. And certain, certain food items like bajra and jaggery and greens which we obtain out of the beetroots are far better sources of iron. Any comment upon heme versus non-heme preparations of iron and their efficiency?
Right. Thank you, Dr. Mahesh. This heme versus non-heme is now more or less well answered. I think ferrous sulfate continues to be the greatest preparation. As I said earlier, unfortunately, it's available free from government supply, so it's lost its reputation. But at 3 mg per kg per day, once a day, fasting should not have any adverse effects. Whenever I give this talk, I am always told that iron has GI adverse effects. Somehow, I don't know whether our patients are afraid to talk to us in PGI and they think that they'll be fired, so they don't tell us. But most of the times, I think iron at 3 mg per kg per day is well tolerated. We've never had to stop iron. And if you think that it is causing adverse effects, maybe just make it thrice a week. It has anyway been shown that thrice a week, twice a week is as good as once a day. So I feel no reason to give any alternative preparation of iron. Thank you.
Last couple of questions.
Can I just, Dr. Neeraj, can I just ask a couple of things? If cost is, Dr. Deepak, if cost is not a limiting factor, then these new iron preparations like iron bisglycinate or iron ferridate, they are more expensive, but they have much less side effects like GI effects and teeth staining. And some of these newer irons are also compatible with milk preparations, can be added to milk. So I just wanted to know your take on that. And I also wanted to ask you, I saw this very interesting contraption on a talk on nutritional anemia on NDTV, which was called the iron fish. It was a metallic fish, which was impregnated with iron. And they said that they should, if vegetarian families or all families add it to their cooking vessel, to the water which is used in rice or in vegetables, and the whole family will get iron, and it has a life of over 5 years. So I did look it up on Amazon. It is a little expensive, about 4,500, but the benefit was they said that you are supplementing iron to the entire family's diet and it lasts 5 years. So I don't know whether you've heard of that.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Josna. So I have read about this. So basically, it's basically a iron ki fish. It is like cooking your food in iron utensils. So basically, it's an iron thing. So it's like a raw iron and you add it to the food in which you're cooking and hoping that some iron will leach out of that so-called fish, which is the shape of a fish. So, so one has to give iron in any form. So if one wants to do, but believe me that Indian families will just not accept it. Or maybe they will, I don't know, or they will stop doing it after a while. So one has to do something, but something has to be done. Either you tell them to eat eggs, they don't want to eat eggs, great, give them oral iron, syrup or tablets. So regarding teeth staining, I have not heard of any syrup which does not cause teeth staining, or maybe you're right that ferrous sulfate does cause more teeth staining, but any iron preparation being allowed to be given with milk is something which is new to me. I have not read in literature that there is an iron available which can be given with milk. So I do not believe that ferrous sulfate has any side effects for me to use an expensive preparation. So if you tell me that I want to use
I will share that with you. It's a product which is launched by the it's a subsidiary of Tata, and Inzipera is the company, and the preparation is TAS iron, and they specifically have their drops, their sprinkles, and the tablets, and all of them they say are compatible with milk. The drops, they actually say you can dissolve it in milk. So this is a medical subsidiary of Tata company.
Right. So I will have to read if there's any sign. Yeah. Sure. So Dr. Josna, I will have to read what is the scientific evidence for this. And other thing which I will share with you is that to my own kids, we actually gave iron with food because they were just not willing to take it on empty stomach. So even that works. So basically, iron has to go in the tummy. If you take it with food or milk, less will be absorbed. But it doesn't mean that nothing will be absorbed. So basically, iron has to go in the tummy. How and when is not important, but it has to go on a regular basis from 6 months of age till 18 years in boys and till menopause in females. That has to be kept in mind. How to give iron, which iron to give is not important. But your comments are really well taken, and I look into this TAS iron, what it is.
Yeah. So I think we had we had an excellent discussion. And it's such a common topic and important topic that there will be never-ending questions. But I really thank Dr. Deepak for a very excellent presentation. Thank audience for their active participation, and thank IAP team for giving me this opportunity to moderate. I hand it over back to Dr. Gaurav, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Neeraj, and thanks, Dr. Deepak, for wonderful sessions. Thank you, Dr. Sushma, and thank you, Dr. Indrajit, for an excellent first session. We have had 99 participants during this session, which is probably some sort of a record.
Yes.
I was telling my wife to log in to make it 100, but she refused. I think it was a really learning experience. Dr. Arun and Dr. Gunjan, please, if you have anything to share, it would be wonderful as Secretary and Treasurer.
I think they had to go somewhere.
Unmute. Unmute Dr. Gunjan.
Dr. Gunjan is muted. Dr. Arun is sitting. Yes.
Yeah, excellent talks. Both the talks were excellent. So I'm just saying that after these, both the talks, iron and vitamin D has to be there on all the prescriptions of even.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
They were excellent talks. They were very wonderful talks and very informative. Thanks a lot, Dr. Sushma and Dr. Deepak Bansal. Very, very excellent.
Right. Thank you so much.
Thank
Thank you to IIP Chandigarh. Thank you, Gaurav. Thank you, Dr. Neeraj, for your contribution. Thank you so much.
And I loved Dr. Deepak's comments on Dr. Sushma's talk also, and her response also. They were very, very well pointed out and very nicely responded also. And Dr. Deepak, I'm sure you're happy with the number of participants. You were a bit concerned about that as well.
Yeah, you know, COVID makes you think negatively, so it's okay.
Lovely. Chalo, let's celebrate the Sunday evening lockdown. All of us. Thank you. Thanks again. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Attendance is compulsory. You saw that message.